Sometimes we underrate the choices we have in life, and it can be difficult to look past our current circumstances in order to explore our options. There are multiple ways to do things and to get our needs met. If we don't realize that we have the freedom to make choices, we'll also have problems learning to adapt. And adapting is essential to our success in life. Join Dr. Townsend as he reviews 4 key areas of life and shares some great insight on what to do if you feel you have already tried everything.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Solutions. This is John Townsend, and I hope you're enjoying the series we're doing on the material that Henry Cloud and I wrote for the book, It's Not My Fault, which actually, if you've read the book, it's not your fault, but it is your problem. And we try to make the distinction about how people don't feel empowered to make the choices they need to make, and sometimes they feel like they've been kind of like put in helpless situations and they feel stuck. And this is an anti-stuck series. It's a get you unstuck series to get the goals you got to get met, and the weight loss, and the great dating, and the great marriage, and the great spiritual life, and the great happiness, and the great career. So we hope you feel some unleashing of some good things for yourself. It's an important series, and one that we hope you are enjoying. Now, this is from chapter 3 of the book, and very simple title of the chapter. You can always find a choice. And it has to do with the fact that sometimes we kind of underrate the choices we've got. I'll give you an example. I was working with a company who, in their business, their core business, it was in the manufacturing world, they had found there was less of a demand for their product. And they didn't know what they were doing. I mean, they didn't know what to do because they were very efficient. They'd have a very low overhead, and they were really saving money. They were very frugal about their expenses, and just couldn't find the customers as things kind of phase out. And we had these discussions because the owner was a very diligent person, was kind of getting discouraged. And finally, he said, "I just don't know if this is it. I mean, I think we've squeezed everything out of this thing we can, and we have to shut the doors." And I remember thinking, that's just not how he should be thinking about it. I said, I think before you do something like that, you've got to think, what do you do that other people need that maybe you don't have to retool your entire company for? And let's take some time on this. There wasn't a major crisis where we had to close the doors the next day, but it was just a trend he was in. And so we talked about it, explored about it, did some research, and found out there was another niche of that manufacturing world where he fit very well. Had to change a few machines and do some retraining, but they were back in business. That's an example where he felt like he had a forced choice decision, didn't have other options, but once he stepped back, he realized he had other choices he didn't need to have. There's all these stories, if you've heard the old story, the stories that the preachers always tell, which is a wonderful story about how elephants are trained to stay still, and the baby elephant has that stake in the ground with a little small gold chain, and then they can't move, and then when it turns into a huge several-ton animal, it still can be controlled to not get out of there because it learned how to stay in that position. And what happens then is that when people get stuck, they're a lot like my friend, the business owner, or they're a lot like that elephant. The first thing they think of is, well, I don't have any options here. And I really want to kind of get rid of that idea, explode that theory for you today in this talk, because one of the big things that I found in working with people, especially high-performing people who are really getting somewhere, is that they always look for choices and they always find choices. Now, you don't have every choice in the world. You can't do anything. I mean, I can't play, NFL football, but I've got lots of choices that I can enjoy in my life, and a lot of times we miss those. But when you think about the way that God constructed life, what we're talking about is an aspect of a happy and productive and successful life called freedom. Good old-fashioned freedom. Galatians 5:1 talks about it, where Paul says to the Galatians, he says, "It was for freedom that Christ died to set you free. Do not therefore go back to a yoke of slavery." And there's lots of arguments about what that means, but one thing we know is that before we had Christ, we had a forced choice life. You only had so many choices you could make because you were enslaved to sin and the law. But Christ died to say, you've got a choice in life, and you have things you can do. And I think Christians have a really hard time, especially about the concept of freedom, because it's sort of like, well, I have the freedom to be a good person. I have the freedom to follow God. I have the freedom to give my money to mission. You have freedom to do all that. But I believe that a good life involves many more freedoms than that. Lots of choices. And the way I look at it is that life, is like my life and your life, we want it to go this route. I want to get better. I want to be a happier person. I want to be more helpful. I want to be more connected and more productive and enjoy things and solve problems. It's like this big 16-lane freeway here, right? There's like all these lanes, and I'm going in this basic direction in life, but I got lots of choices. I can choose where to go to dinner tonight. I can also choose who my friends are. I can choose how I feel about things, right? That's the way I look at it. We're supposed to go in a big direction, but there's lots of ways to look at this. But if you've been a person who hasn't had a lot of freedom, a lot of choices, it feels like one lane. It feels like I can only do it this way. And when you talk to people, I talk to a lot of people in business who will say things like, what's the right way to do this? Now, what's the right way to say this? What's the right way to approach this problem? And I'll go, well, there are some rights and wrongs, but I think you've got lots of more choices than you think you do. One of my favorite consulting phrases that I use when I'm working with people is, a lot of ways to skin a cat. I think that's a bad thing to say, because then if you're a cat lover, you're going to write me a bad letter and say, what are you talking about, skinning the cat? Let me change that. There's lots of roads to Rome. So forget the skin a cat. We're not skinning any cats on this show. We love cats. But there's lots of roads to Rome. And watch out for your brain saying, no, there's only one way to do this. Especially when you hear yourself or other people say, well, what's the right way? There are some rights and wrongs in life, right? We're not supposed to kill people. We're not supposed to be mean and selfish. There are rights and wrongs. But there are lots of ways to be nice. There are lots of ways to have creative energy. There are lots of ways to spend your time. So watch out for trying to make everything into a rule, because if you had a background like that, you will not be a free person, and you won't have the choices you need. So here's some of the keys. One thing is you find out is that people who have issues in freedom, they have problems in a thing called adaptability. Adaptability. And what I mean by adaptability is when you're encountered with an obstacle or a problem or a frustration, you just figure another way to get the thing solved. Like I remember when our kids were small, I would try to be the father in the primary school, kindergarten, involved dad thing. And I always enjoyed that. My wife's a teacher, so I got to hang around with her in the school. And I remember walking in when one of my kids was in kindergarten, and kind of did the sit back and observe to see if I could help out. But they were doing that thing where the kids sit around in a circle and they jostle for a position so the teacher can do a puppet show or whatever. And I remember my son was trying to go sit in between two friends because it was kind of crowded. And he said, you could see how when their kids are sitting somewhere, he's sort of saying, can I sit here? And for some reason, his two buddies had a mean kid day. I don't know. They're great kids, but mean kid day. And they put their shoulders together so he couldn't get in. And he sort of pushed a little bit, and they went, no, just mean kid day. It just happens. And I remember watching him and thinking, okay, is he going to get depressed now? Is he going to run out of the house or run to school or whatever? And I remember him looking up, and I saw this sad look on his face. And then I watched his face, and he kind of shrugged, and he went and sat somewhere else with another kid. And I thought, well, dodge that bullet. He didn't, run off crying. And that's a good example of adaptability. Well, you guys don't want to be nice to me. I'm not going to sit around here and just kind of feel like helpless and like a victim. I'm going to sit over with these kids. That's what adaptability is. It's a great condition. And if you're an adaptable person, you're going to have a pretty good life because you have a practical aspect of you that says, if not this, then what? Plan A is not working, what's plan B? And I think that people have a plan A and a plan B and a plan C. They just are a lot happier in life because they don't have that aspect of a rigid demand. And what I mean by a rigid demand is that I'm only going to be happy if it happens this way. So that when I drive up to, Burger King and say, I'd like, curly fries, and they say, all we've got is onion rings. If I go, I'm sorry, the only thing I can have is curly fries. I mean, how can I be happy otherwise? That's a rigid demand. I'm saying there's only one way I can get my needs met. And I'm sort of in trouble because now I've limited all the things in my life to a few things to get my needs met. You have to understand, the Bible talks about how God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. God has all these resources for us. He's got great people. He's got resources of love and energy. He's got great missions and tasks for you. But there is no one person, there's no one job, there's no one business or church or anything that is totally indispensable. Nothing's really indispensable except for God. And so adaptable people realize, well, if you don't like me, I'm sad, I'll try to work it out, but I'll go somewhere else. If this church is not working, I'll find another one. I'll try to understand it and work with it. Nothing's perfect, but I'll try to contribute. But if it doesn't, I'll go somewhere else. This job doesn't work. And you find that these people go through life really successful because they don't have the idea that this is the only way in this rigid demand that I can have my needs met. There's lots of ways to do it. It means you're flexible. It means you're agile. And it means you sort of like, you really don't allow yourself to be so dependent on one thing that it can control your life if you don't have it. Okay? So, to have choices, realize when you're in a situation where you're frustrated, you feel like there's an obstacle, give yourself adaptability and say, what's plan B? Because there's always a plan B. I mean, think about the financial recession. I mean, I've worked with so many companies since then, 2008, and so many people have bounced back and said, yeah, it was hard and we were having to do things differently, but we did other things. Or people that, I know so many people during that period that actually left corporate positions and started their own, hot dog stand on the street because it was time to do that, and they're doing fine now. They took a risk and they did it because they're adaptable, right? Secondly, there's a dynamic, and you'll see this a lot. It's called learned helplessness. Henry and I study and teach on learned helplessness and have been for many years because we see it especially for so many people in their relational lives and in their personal lives and in their job lives where they really do feel like it's never happened and so I'm going to kind of give up. And I'm not trying to be critical or negative on anybody here because I've certainly felt a lot of learned helplessness in my life. But learned helplessness is a research-based concept where what they did is they took animals like dogs and rats, and here's the food over here, in the box. The dog needs to get the food, and here's the dog over here in the box, and in between the two is a little sensor that if you walk across it, it'll go off. Will give you the sensor will go off like an alarm and give you a mild electric shock, and the dog learns, uh-oh, as soon as I go across, wow, I don't like that. That was painful. So the dog comes back, and then when they take away the sensor, they found out the dog just kind of stood there and didn't want to go eat because it sort of felt like, well, my history of moving toward that food has always been I'll get shot, so I give up. And learned helplessness is a killer. It's not good for you, and it's not something that God ever intended. And so be aware of the tendency when you get discouraged, because it's a feeling of discouragement, and it's a sense of powerlessness. When you feel powerless and discouraged, often that means that you're in a learned helpless position. What it means is your past has told you that your future is going to be exactly the same as the past. You know what? I know a lot of people whose future is going to be just like their past. And why is that? Because they're not looking at solutions videos. If you haven't changed, if you haven't been open to new ideas and God reaching you in new ways and new people and new thoughts and trying new things, and you can find this in the psychological and performance research, the best predictor of the future is the past if you're not changed at all. But if you're in transformation and trying stuff and learning stuff and struggling with all this stuff, all of a sudden, your future can be very different from your past. So learned helplessness means it's always was this way, it's always going to be this way, but generally speaking, it's because a person didn't know their options and they're just so discouraged. So when that happens, when you feel learned helplessness, remember, wait a minute, I'm watching a video. I'm talking to people who are growing. Sure, I'm screwed up. Sure, they're screwed up, but we're changing. And go back to Galatians chapter 5 where Paul says, "It was for freedom that Christ died to set you free." Translated a different way, not really a translation, but a description, it was for freedom from learned helplessness that Christ died to set you free. Learned helplessness, the sin nature, the valley, the life of death, and the law of sin and death, lots of things. But you don't have to live in learned helplessness, all right? Now, I thought it'd be helpful to talk about 3 scenarios in this process, and they're in the book, where you see the choice, what's described in the book as the choice discovering model. You see it in the world of dating. You see in the world of emotional issues. And you see in the world of weight. And I'm going to add another one. You see it in the world of career. This is not in the book. This is a freebie that's not in the book. So you can add a benefit, right? These are big issues for people. Working with singles for a long, long time. How many times have you heard it said, I'm just in an area that doesn't have a lot of really good men. I just need to get out of here because the good men are somewhere else. In fact, Henry makes the point in the chapter that he was in the Midwest and they were saying there's no good people. All the good people are on the West Coast in L.A. And he went to L.A. and all the singles said in L.A., well, the only good people in the Midwest. The idea was you have no choice. But if you start applying the model of you do have choices and discovery, what you find in the dating life is instead of, well, I guess I'll just babysit my niece's kids because that's all I'm good for until I'm 87, that's a choiceless, rigid demand, or learned helplessness viewpoint. First thing you say is, where are the good ones? Instead of saying, well, they're not there because I don't see them because, I go to church and then I go to my job and then I go to the pizza place and then I get my food and then I come home. Gosh, they're not around there. Right, that's a very limited, choiceless viewpoint. If there are sharp, attractive, good values, Christian, successful, growing, cool people who are single in your area, unless you're a forest ranger, then you probably, if you want to get married, you probably have to move. Where are they? Well, I don't know where they are, but I know that they're somewhere because healthy, cool people don't stay at home all day and watch TV and babysit their neighbors' kids. They are probably community activities, probably involved with the arts. Maybe they're in the Chamber of Commerce. Maybe they're in sports. Maybe they're going to soccer games with kids or whatever. But the first question to say is, where are the good ones? And the second thing to do is, who do I talk to? Like, what married people have success? Nothing succeeds like success. Maybe I need to talk to some people and say, how'd you guys get married? Did, the person just come down the chimney like Santa Claus and say, here I am, I'm God's best for you? I doubt it. Talk to some married people and they'll say, well, I don't know, I did eHarmony. Or, matter of fact, Henry's got a website on this, a dating website. You need to check it out. Make sure you check out his website because he's got a really good one on dating. But talk to people who are successful, all right? So that gives you sort of the open doors in your head, like maybe there's 16 lanes here. Then you go to emotions. People get depressed or they get anxiety or they get anger problems or they feel down and they sort of don't have that energy they need and they feel bad inside. And God never meant for you to feel that way. I mean, certainly we have struggle. Jesus said we've got struggle in this world and all this, and we'll have that until things are wrapped up. But you can feel a lot better than you're feeling. Well, you can't tell your emotions will straighten up and fly right. That's not going to work. And the choice-less model says, I guess I'm doomed to feel this way, I deserve it, and there's nothing I can do. I tell you, as a person who's been doing radio counseling for many, many years, one of the questions that I hear over and over and over again, I'm depressed, I've got anger problems, I've got an eating disorder or whatever I've got, is as a diagnostic person, one of my first questions is, well, sorry to hear that, Sally. That sounds tough. What have you done so far? And they'll say, well, I read a book or whatever. And I'll say, have you tried counseling? Yeah, I did try. It didn't work. Okay, well, sorry to hear that. It really didn't work. No, it didn't. And then does that mean that they went for 3 years once a week and did homework and, brought their stuff in and had a licensed person and had a support group? I've been doing this a long time, and I think maybe one person or two people out of thousands have said that. The other 99.9% will always say, well, I went for like a session or 3 sessions or, 5 sessions. It just didn't work. Now, my response will be, Bill, you weren't there a long enough time to really do anything. I mean, the first few sessions, you're trying to get to know the person. They're trying to get to know you. Maybe it was the wrong counselor, or maybe you didn't go long enough. But if I were in your shoes and I was going to a physical therapist and I didn't feel better after one session, I'd either say, should I feel better? Or I should say, maybe I've got the wrong physical therapist. But it's not the counseling that's the problem. It's not the process. God's been talking about wise people in our lives and healing for many, many, many years. Maybe you just didn't do it long enough. So the question would be, where is the expertise? Find some church, or we can help you find somebody or whatever. But where's the expertise in the area, and what is the path? Somebody says, well, I can fix you in 3 sessions. I kind of doubt it if it's a real, troubling kind of an issue. But what's the path? Is it going to take once a week? Is it going to take twice a week? Am I going to have to do 12-step at the same time? But now you've got options. Where's the expertise and what's the path? Let's look at weight. All of us struggle with weight sooner or later. Most of us struggle with the too much. A few of us struggle with the not enough. But helplessness says, well, I've always had a weight problem. I probably always will. It's in my genetics. Well, forget genetics. I mean, that's an issue. You got to take advantage of it, of the reality. But it doesn't mean there's stuff that you can do to make life better. Where are the programs? Weight Watchers. I'm a firm believer in Weight Watchers. Well, it's been around 40 years. I know that's why it's so good, because they've evolved it, and they've developed it, and they've researched it. Where's the programs? Where are the specialists? Do you have a diet person, nutrition? What is my accountability system? So many of my friends and my clients who can't lose weight, they never have accountability. They get discouraged and they sleep in, and then they get depressed and they eat too much. They don't have that, it's 5 a.m. friends saying, hey, I love you, but we're getting out there. And is there an emotional component? So many people, they do the structures and they've got the gym, they got the nutrition, but they've got some hurts inside they haven't been addressed. They've got to come back up here. But see, now you're not helpless anymore. Now you've got choices. And in the career aspect, I don't have the job I want. It's not the right paying job, or doesn't mean anything for me. It's not the right fit. It's not who I am on a passion level or a skill level or whatever. But, maybe I'm just supposed to be this way. Well, nobody ever said every job's got to be, make you feel ecstatic all the time. I mean, that's why they call it work. It's work. But do some R&D. There's lots of jobs out there. There are job fairs. There are online sources. You know what else there are? There are coaches. And coaches are specifically trained to say, let's find the right fit for you. Now, if you're sort of like in that mode of, okay, I'm not as stuck, then you're getting this. If you're looking at this and say, you don't get it, John, I've done all this stuff and it's not working, I think you might have an emotional issue where we call it defending against hope. Some people, when they have been discouraged so long and somebody else presents options to them, they feel like, well, there's a fear that triggers that says, I can't be set up again. I can't be let down again. I can't be discouraged again. So what happens is they defend against it by finding all sorts of yes buts and that sort of thing. And really, it's not even conscious. You're not even aware of it. My experience is that most people have 2 needs in this area. When you're stuck in career or weight or emotions or relationships or whatever, you do need someone to listen, someone to empathize, somebody to get it. But once you are thoroughly understood, that's stage 1. You've got to be thoroughly understood. Stage 1 is once you're thoroughly understood and you've received the support and the grace, Now you're ready to be challenged. Not many people grow who get challenged without being understood. Not many people grow who are understood and never challenged. People that are challenged and never understood kind of end up beating themselves up and living under the law, and they feel discouraged, and it's hard. So it's a life of drudgery. People that are understood and never challenged just kind of end up these happy blobs that never get anything done. So watch out and be aware that there comes a point in every person's life, and I know what mine feels like, when you're frustrated about dating or weight or money or career. And you pour your story out and somebody says, I'm with you, I get it, I'm for you, I want you to win, and I understand how hard it's been. And the way God made you, you should kind of feel like, I'm not alone. You get it, I'm not all by myself in this issue. Now I'm ready to make some choices and have some plans. That's how God made us. If you find that after being understood, you need more understanding, and you need to vent more and vent more, one or two things is happening. One is you need a professional, because it might be that there's a hole inside that only a good therapy set of sessions can help, because the hole is a deeper injury. Or there might be a part of you sort of like looking for just infinite understanding and infinite love and infinite compassion with no sense of responsibility. And that can be a stuckness for you. You don't want to have that. You know, Israel was sort of like that for a while. You know, they were a generation that did not remember Egypt, so they just griped and grumbled because they'd forgotten how bad it was in slavery. So they could never be satisfied till God had to give them some boundaries. So get understood, and then be ready to get challenged. Then remember, there are circles of choice, and what circles of choice refers to is learn where the breakdown was. You know, you lost your choices if you've had a lot of this experience of feeling learned helplessness and this sort of thing and not having choices. You lost your choices probably a long time ago, either in a bad relationship or a bad childhood or something that happened in childhood or adolescence or in a marriage or a dating relationship or even a bad career thing where you began to feel that discouragement. Go back to the breakdown time and say, when did I lose freedom? Do a little detective work here. When did I lose my freedom? When did I feel like, I don't have that much say-so in my life? Life kind of takes me around. Life's not going to happen to me. I'm not going to happen to life. Life happens to me. That's why I love Steve Jobs' biography by Walter Isaacson, where he says one of his goals was to make a dent in the universe. Now, what a great right-brain way to explain, I don't want life to happen to me, I want to happen to life. He did make a dent in the universe. He made a lot of changes in the way that we're looking at things. So, but when did I lose freedom? Maybe it's when a teacher didn't believe in me, or a coach was not good to me, or somebody in my life, maybe a dating relationship or a spouse was really wicked with me, and I began thinking, I must not be worth anything, and I don't even go through the pain of fighting this. It was just so bad. And that's the point. You've got to increase your circle. That's the point. You've got to say, I began to live a one-lane life. I got to live a 16-lane life again. Increase those circles and realize my past doesn't determine my future. Watch out for statements like, you can't trust other people. If it's not one thing or it's another. Everything that's going to have good, there's a yin and a yang to all that. You got to watch out for statements like that, because what it says is don't hope, don't dream. Certainly bad things happen, but don't front load it with a discouraging statement, because maybe it won't happen. Remember that what they say is 85% of the things that we're anxious about never, ever happen. Don't live under that cloud. God did not intend you to live that way. Let me give you a couple questions to think about. Number one is, right now in my personal and my professional life, personal and professional, where am I living in one lane? And where do I need to see 16? So name a place in my life where I'm feeling like there's just only one way to go. I don't have other choices. Number two, who do I know who is a positive person who can listen to me, but also challenge me to get the blinders off and see life in a bigger way? It's a really good life. It's a hard life, but it's a really good one. So I hope that you can live a life where, as we go back to, It's not my fault. Sure, it may not be your fault in life the way you are or the way that things have happened, but you have lots of choices to move out of that. It can be much better. So have a great week. I hope the solutions is helpful to you, especially in all aspects of the life that God intended. Take care.
For more Solutions recordings or other personal and spiritual growth products by Dr. Henry Cloud and Dr. John Townsend, visit our website at cloudtownsend.com or call 800-676-HOPE.